Darkness fell over the village of Obaoma. The moon hid behind restless clouds, as if ashamed of what it was about to witness. Dogs barked without reason, and owls hooted mournfully in the distance. That night, something heavy hung in the air, something beyond human eyes, but deeply felt in the soul. Inside a mud hut, a young woman named Ngozi tossed on her mat. Sweat clung to her forehead though the night was cool. Her ears were filled with a sound that refused to leave her heart, the frail cry of her newborn child. She covered her ears, but the tiny wails pierced through. To others, the sound of a baby crying meant life. To Ngozi, it meant shame, rejection, and the heavy chains of judgment. Because the child had no father. In a village where tradition ruled more than compassion, such a child was called a curse. Mothers were mocked. Families were shamed. And young girls like Ngozi were pushed into the shadows, branded with names sharp enough to tear the flesh from their bones. Ngozi's eyes glistened with tears. She looked at her baby, so small, so innocent, so helpless. The child's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb, as though begging to stay. But in Ngozi's heart burned a terrible decision. That night, she whispered words that should never leave a mother's lips. Better you never lived, than for me to live with this shame. At the hour when the cock had not yet crowed, when the world still slept and spirits roamed freely, Ngozi rose from her mat. She tied the baby in a ragged cloth, pressing the child against her chest so the cries would not echo too loud. Step by step, she crept out of her hut. The night air was cold, but not colder than her heart. Her bare feet touched the earth lightly, as though she feared the ground itself would scream. She walked past the silent market square. Past the shrine of the ancestors. Past the great Iroko tree that stood like a watchman over the village. Every shadow seemed to follow her. Every rustle of leaves felt like a whisper. Ngozi, where are you taking the child? But Ngozi hardened her heart. She reached a lonely part of the forest, where the ground was soft and the trees stood close like mourners. With trembling hands, she dug at the earth. The soil clung to her nails, as though resisting her. But she continued, her breath harsh, her tears falling silently into the hole she made. When the hole was deep enough, she looked down at her baby. The child had stopped crying, perhaps tired, perhaps trusting. A small yawn escaped its lips. Ngozi's heart almost broke. But then the faces of villagers flashed in her mind, the pointing fingers, the insults, the laughter. And like a woman possessed, she placed the baby into the shallow grave. The earth covered the child, little by little. First the feet. Then the chest. Then the small face. Silence. Ngozi fell to her knees. She whispered, "Forgive me." And then she fled. Ngozi left Obaoma behind. She carried only a small bag and a heavy heart. She told herself the child was gone, buried, forgotten. She told herself it was the only way. In the city, life was different, fast, loud, careless. No one asked about her past. No one cared about her shame. There she met Chike, a wealthy merchant. His voice was gentle, his hands strong, his presence commanding. He fell in love with her beauty and grace. And when he asked her, "Do you have any children?" she smiled sweetly and lied. "No. I have never given birth." With that lie, she sealed her fate. They married in splendor. She wore gold and silk. She dined on the finest meals. She rode in carriages while others walked barefoot. But even among riches, guilt is a poor companion. And guilt does not stay silent forever. At first, it was only in her dreams. She would wake in the night, shaking, drenched in sweat, hearing the cry of a baby far away. But soon, the cries left the world of dreams and entered the world of the living. One night, Chike shook her awake. "Ngozi, do you hear that?" She froze. Yes. The sound was there, clear, sharp, piercing. The cry of a baby. They searched the house. In the living room, the sound shifted. In the kitchen, it echoed. In the washroom, it rang louder. Finally, they returned to their bedroom. And there, on their marriage bed, lay a baby, wrapped in rags, crying softly. Ngozi's knees gave way. Those rags, they were the same cloth she had used years ago in Obaoma to bind her child before lowering it into the earth. Chike gasped. Whose child is this? Before their eyes, the baby vanished. Months became years, and Ngozi's womb remained closed. Doctors from the city prescribed tonics. Herbalists burned leaves over her belly. Priests poured libations and muttered incantations. But the womb that once carried life now refused to open. Her husband's family whispered in anger. She is cursed. She has eaten her own children. She is a barren tree. The whispers reached her ears. Each word was a dagger. But worse than the whispers were the hauntings. At night, she would wake to the sound of a baby crying in the courtyard. She would run outside with trembling hands, searching desperately. But the courtyard would be empty, only moonlight and shadows. One evening, while she and her husband sat in their dining room, the sound of tiny feet echoed on the marble floor. Tip, tap, tip, tap. Her husband frowned. Are we being robbed? He grabbed a lantern and searched. They found nothing, until they returned to the dining table and saw it. A small clay cup of pap, steaming hot, placed neatly beside their plates. Chike's eyes widened. Who placed this here? Ngozi trembled. She knew. The pap was the same food the poor ones gave their babies back in Obaoma. But when they blinked, the cup was gone. Her husband looked at her with suspicion. Ngozi, what is this? She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. She could not speak. She could not confess. The gods had begun their punishment. The hauntings grew stronger. Some nights, Ngozi would awake to hear soft laughter, the kind only babies make, bubbling like music. She would turn and see the child sitting at the edge of her bed, tiny legs swinging, tiny hands reaching for her. When she tried to touch it, her hands would pass through thin air. Other nights, she would hear splashing in the washroom. When she opened the door, water dripped everywhere. On the floor lay wet footprints, too small to belong to anyone but a child. Her husband saw them too. Fear carved lines into his face. Who is this child? Why does it haunt us? He demanded. Ngozi bit her lip until blood ran. She had lied for too long. She had buried her secret too deep. But still, she could not speak the truth. The gods would not let her hide much longer. Finally, after years of torment, Ngozi could endure no more. She knelt before her husband and begged. Take me to Obaoma. The answer lies there. If we do not go, this haunting will never end. Reluctantly, Chike agreed. They journeyed back to her village. But the people did not welcome her. They remembered. They whispered. That is the woman who buried her own child. Does she think the gods forget? At the shrine, the elders gathered. And from the crowd stepped an old widow, her voice breaking with age. I know the truth, she said. The widow's story fell upon Ngozi like thunder. The night you buried your baby, I was in the forest. I heard its cries. I dug it out with my own hands. The child lived. I raised him as my own, though I was poor. He grew, but sickness struck. I had no money, no medicine. The boy died in my arms. Ngozi wailed. The ground beneath her swayed. Her husband's face turned pale with horror. He realized the truth. He had married a woman who had lied about her past, who had tried to bury her own flesh, who had caused her own son to suffer and die in poverty. The elders shook their heads. The chief elder rose, his voice booming like a drum. Ngozi, You thought the earth would keep your secret, but the earth never forgets blood. You buried your son. You abandoned him to fate. The poor widow showed more love than you, yet she was powerless to save him. The gods have judged you. Ngozi fell on her face, beating her chest, crying, "Forgive me. Ancestors, forgive me. Spirits of the earth, forgive me." But the gods do not accept tears as payment. From that day, her body withered. When they returned from the village, food turned to ash in her mouth. Her womb, already barren, burned with endless pain. Her husband moved away from her, his heart hardened. The child's spirit never left. Its cries filled her nights. Its laughter haunted her days. Sometimes, she would see it standing in mirrors, its reflection staring while her own face was pale with fear. Other times, she would feel tiny hands pulling at her clothes, tugging at her hair, pressing against her back. No one else could see it, but Ngozi lived with it until her last breath. On her deathbed, Ngozi lay frail and broken, her once beautiful body now only skin and bone. Servants stood at a distance, whispering. Her husband sat stiffly, cold and silent. But Ngozi's eyes were fixed on the corner of the room. There stood her child. Not crying. Not vanishing. Just watching. With the last strength in her voice, she whispered, "My child, forgive me." And then, with one final cry, the child's spirit filled the room, echoing through every wall, every ear, every heart. Ngozi gasped, and her breath left her forever. The elders buried Ngozi's body far from the village cemetery, away from the innocent and the pure. The earth itself seemed to reject her, leaving her resting place in a quiet, lonely clearing. Chike stood beside the freshly turned soil, his polished modern attire dusty from the journey, face contorted in grief. Tears streamed silently down his cheeks as he looked upon the grave, his hands trembling, unable to touch the cold earth that now held the woman he had once loved. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sorrowful lament across the clearing, as if nature itself mourned her tragic fate. Even today, the people of Obaoma tell Ngozi's tragic story. Shame may fade with time, but guilt lingers in the heart forever. The earth never forgets what humans try to bury, no matter how deep. A mother's hands were meant to nurture and protect, never to harm or destroy. And when the wind howls through the village at night, some swear they hear it, the faint, sorrowful cry of a child, calling for the mother who betrayed him. It is a warning. It is a curse. It is a lesson. Thank you for watching. Kindly subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories.